Agenda.
Good morning and welcome to the program. Parliament returns this week and it's a crucial week for the Gillard government, the minority government. Some big tests, the carbon tax vote on Wednesday. Looks like it's got the numbers for that, but the Migration Act, well, that is a different story altogether. With one MP, the crossbench MP, Tony Crook, remains undecided. With me this morning, I've got Liberal frontbencher Mitch Fifield. Good morning, Senator.
Morning, Kieran.
And in Melbourne, we've got Labor frontbencher Richard Marles. Richard, good to see you.
Good to see you, Kieran.
And, Richard, with the carbon tax vote on Wednesday, it looks like that should be a milestone the government should be happy with, but there's so many other distractions detracting from that at the moment, and it doesn't seem to be getting the mileage it should be.
Well, I think the country is pretty focused on what's going on with the carbon price, and you're right in saying that the vote that will come up this week is an important first step in the passage of what is a really important piece of legislation for the country. This is going to secure the jobs of the future. This will mean that we have an economy that can continue to grow without seeing a corresponding growth in emissions. And so this really, when it's all said and done, is a piece of microeconomic reform. It is about jobs in the future, and that's pretty consistent with a government which has created 140,000 jobs over the last year, 750,000 jobs since coming to office, and this will secure the jobs of the future.
But Richard, the bottom line is, even though it's obviously a very unpopular piece of legislation, and it's been the subject of, as I've mentioned, intense debate both inside and outside of the Parliament, but it doesn't seem the government can take a trick. There are those other issues that, like the Migration Act changes, which remain very much up in the air, and of course the ongoing talk about Kevin Rudd, which we'll get to later. It just seems that even when the government does have a win, it's not really the sort of win, the sort of magnitude that you would hope from a big piece of legislation like that.
Well, we're dealing with some very difficult issues facing the country at the moment, and you mentioned asylum seekers, and no doubt we'll talk more about that, but it's obviously a very complicated problem which is a challenge for the country, but so too is putting a price on carbon. And I think that in due course, when people assess the way in which we have dealt with the very difficult jobs of government, we will be marked appropriately for that. And the fact of the matter is we are facing up to this. We are meeting the challenges that are coming to the country. We are understanding where the rest of the world's going, and we're dealing with it. You know, that stands in stark contrast to what the opposition are doing. I mean, Tony Abbott would have no sense that there is any change to the climate going on, nor would he see the way in which the world is responding to it. And so as a result, he's plunging his head straight in the sand. And as a result of that, he's in fact threatening the jobs of the future. And you can't do that without threatening the jobs of the present. We're dealing with the issues. He's running away from them.
The carbon tax vote, Senator Fifield, we know that it's unpopular in the electorate. Obviously, your side vehemently opposed to it. But this is a big milestone for a minority government. They've been able to pass all of their bills thus far, and this is the biggest one yet. On Wednesday, they've got the numbers. That looks like it's going to pass the lower house. You've got to concede that at least is a big legislative victory for this minority government.
Well, it's a funny sort of milestone that imposes additional costs on business, that further exacerbates cost of living pressures on Australian families, and which will see jobs destroyed. That's a very strange milestone. But I do agree with one thing that Richard said. He said that if the carbon tax is put in place, that the government will be marked appropriately for it. And I think they will be marked appropriately for it. They'll get a big F at the next election. Richard also said that the coalition is putting its head in the sand in relation to a carbon tax. Well, if we're doing that, then we're in good company, because an overwhelming majority of the Australian public think that this tax is a bad idea. Even if it does pass the House of Reps this week, it's still not too late. It still has to pass the Australian Senate, and I would still be hopeful that the wiser heads in the Australian Labor Party would recognise that they're going down a path that they should not.
But that's not going to happen. Obviously, the bill looks like it is all set to pass both houses, with the Greens support in the upper house. Once this is passed, Senator Fifield, you concede that a lot of the heat out of this debate will be removed as well once that passes both houses into the new year, and I suppose there'll be a bit of a return mid-year when it comes into force. But the sort of campaign that you've run to this point may not have the same cut-through as it's had quite successfully to this point with the campaign against the carbon tax.
Well, that's certainly what the Australian Labor Party would be hoping, is that people would forget that a carbon tax is impending, that it will be coming into effect in the middle of next year. Part of our job is to make sure that this issue remains before the Australian public. I don't think we'll have to work terribly hard to make sure that that's the case, because Australians are very sensitive about effects on their household budgets. The carbon tax wouldn't be that far away. And we'll also have groups such as the New Manufacturing Alliance, who have declared today that they have formed, that they will be seeking to, at the very least, see this legislation deferred, because it's going to be bad for jobs.
But that's no surprise. We know that vested interests have always, various vested interests have been opposed to taxes on all sides. That's really can't be seen as any significant contribution or change in the debate, can it?
Well, I don't think wanting the industry that you work in to flourish is a vested interest. I don't think wanting to make sure that the people who currently work in that industry continue to have jobs should be characterised as a vested interest. We hear the government talk about the changing global economic environment, that there are challenges on the horizon. If that's the case, then this is absolutely the wrong time to introduce a new tax. Australians don't want it, business doesn't want it, the government should forget it.
That is true, that big business as well, Richard Marles, is making that point, particularly with the ongoing uncertainty in the Eurozone. Treasurer Swan's heading to Europe this week. You'll see firsthand just how precarious things are in that part of the world. Why not at least defer the introduction? Obviously the government has no intention of doing that, but things do remain very much uncertain globally at the moment.
Well, I don't accept that's what big business wants. I think what big business wants is certainty. And I think big business absolutely knows that putting a price on carbon is a phenomenon that's going on across the world, and they want to know how this country in Australia is going to do it. And that's the question.
A number of the key business groups, Richard Marles, a number of the key the peak bodies are saying they want it deferred, the AIG and others saying that very thing. So the business representatives are arguing that case.
People want to see certainty, and they want to know the way in which this country is going to put a price on carbon. And look, a lot is overstated in terms of the campaign that's been run by the opposition. It is a mother of all scare campaigns. At the end of the day, we're talking about an increase in costs for the average family household of slightly under $10 a week, and for 2/3 of Australian households, that will be that'll be fully compensated or more than fully compensated by the package that's being put in place. 9 out of 10 people will get some benefits from the package that is being put in place to help deal with any increase in costs. This is a small thing, certainly small compared to the GST, for example, and what we need to be doing right now is decoupling the growth of our economy from a growth in emissions, and that's actually going to put us in the most globally competitive position that we can be looking forward to the future, and that's how we secure jobs. And I actually think what Australians want from their government is a government that understands the issues that are facing the country and is in there batting for jobs, and that is what we are doing.
What you've got, though, coming up on Thursday is we're expecting a vote possibly as early as Thursday on the changes to the Migration Act. Those changes designed to circumvent the High Court ruling of late August, which of course scuttled the Malaysia deal. This vote potentially could break the record, which has stood since, I think, 1929, Stanley Bruce's government, that a government hasn't lost a vote on one of its own bills or an amendment to one of its own bills. That would be an inauspicious record to break, wouldn't it? And it would detract from what you see as a carbon tax win on Wednesday.
Oh, well, if we're talking about putting legislation through the Parliament, we are, of course, a minority government, but despite that, we have passed more legislation over the last 12 months than the Howard government did in its corresponding first 12 months in office. So there is no question that the Parliament is functioning and the government is working. But when it comes to the amendments to the Migration Act, what we will see this week, if Tony Abbott holds to what he is currently saying, saying is an act of rank hypocrisy on his part. This is a man who has stood for offshore processing for a decade, and he will be voting against the only door open to processing asylum seekers offshore that exists in light of what the High Court has determined. He'll be doing that knowing all the dangers associated with getting on those leaky boats.
I'll put that claim of, or that accusation of hypocrisy to Senator Fifield in a moment, but while we're talking about hypocrisy, why don't we talk about what John Faulkner has said about the Labor position and what others in your party would quietly be hoping, and that is that this bill is voted down, is blocked, because they don't support offshore processing. In fact, John Faulkner told the caucus last week, or a couple of weeks ago, that it's contrary to the Labor platform, offshore processing. So if you're going to talk about hypocrisy, what about those claims from your own side?
Well, I don't accept the proposition that it's against the ALP's platform, in that the ALP's platform has many components to it in dealing with, including dealing in cooperation with our nearest neighbours by having a regional approach to the issue of asylum seekers, and by putting in place all measures appropriate to prevent people coming to this country on boats. Now, that is what we were putting in place through the Malaysian arrangement, and this is an arrangement.
But Labor has said repeatedly, Richard Marles, Labor said repeatedly, so often in opposition, accused the Pacific Solution of lacking integrity because it sent asylum seekers to non-signatory countries to the UN Refugee Convention, and now you want to do the same thing here with Malaysia. So you're accusing Tony Abbott of hypocrisy, but surely Labor needs to recognise that it's being hypocritical itself on that front.
Well, no, I don't accept that, Kieran. The Malaysian arrangement had within it important safeguards for those people who were going to Malaysia. The Malaysian arrangement was worked out in cooperation with the UNHCR. Neither of those points applied to the Pacific Solution as it was negotiated by the Howard government. The Malaysian arrangement would see an extra 1,000 asylum seekers come to this country under the ordered program, which again is done through the UNHCR. There was no such balance associated with the Pacific Solution that was put in place by the Howard government. And the Malaysian arrangement is consistent with what we've been doing from day one, which is to process people as soon as they come here, which is not what we saw with the Pacific Solution, where people were sent to Nauru and allowed to languish on Nauru in some cases of up to 5 years. They are very different ways in which we go about this problem. But what the Malaysian arrangement would do is break the model of people smuggling, which would stop people going on those very dangerous journeys from Indonesia to Australia, and would put the UNHCR back in charge in terms of being our principal agent as to who this country's asylum is extended to, rather than people smugglers in Indonesia. Now, what we're going to see from Tony Abbott, if he votes against this, is that knowing all of that, he will be closing the one door which is open to offshore processing.
Let's put this to Senator Fifield then. Given the Coalition has been such a fierce advocate of offshore processing for so long, and also under the Howard government, Nauru was not a signatory to the UN Refugee Convention, and now it's the benchmark that the Coalition is setting. Isn't that hypocritical, as we've been, as Richard Marles has been pointing out, that in government you have one standard, but now it seems for political purposes you've changed that standard?
Not at all, Kieran, but since we're talking about hypocrisy, I have to mention Exhibit A for hypocrisy, and that is obviously there will be no carbon tax under a government I lead. Hypocrisy Exhibit B for the Australian Labor Party is they're embarking upon offshore processing. When the Australian Labor Party were in opposition, they said every single day of the week that offshore processing was immoral, that offshore processing was not effective.
But we covered that. We did cover that. We covered that. And we did put, I did put that to Richard Marles. But on your specific claim, the claim against the Coalition, you supported sending asylum seekers to countries, non-signatory countries, to the Refugee Convention in government. Mm-hmm. Now, when there's a vote in Parliament this week, it seems Mr Abbott's changed that standard. Why?
Well, the Nauru solution under the Coalition, we're effectively controlling the facts on the ground. We were running that particular facility. the Australian Labor Party are proposing an entirely different scenario in Malaysia, where the Australian government will not have effective control on the ground. We think that the appropriate way to make sure that there is decent, adequate standards on the ground now is for any offshore processing site to be a signatory to the UN Convention for Refugees.
So it's a road to Damascus almost, that you've been convinced by Labor's arguments here.
No, we look at practical solutions. Nauru, we controlled the facts on the ground. It was a decent solution. Malaysia is not a decent solution. Now, it's the Australian Labor Party who have had the conversion on the road to Damascus. They now think offshore processing is okay. Apparently, offshore processing is only immoral and ineffective when it's done by the coalition. Apparently, it's effective and moral when the Australian Labor Party is doing it. The Labor Party could have offshore processing.
Did point out that UNHCR has ticked this off.
No, they haven't. They haven't.
Well,
that's not true.
They've worked with the government throughout this process.
They have not ticked it off. The UNHCR is very clear, very adamant that they have not given the tick off on this. Malaysia is not a signatory to the UN Refugee Convention. Now, the Labor Party could have offshore processing this week if they agreed to our very simple amendment, which is that any country has to be a signatory to the UN Refugee Convention. They could do that. And Richard Marles was also talking about the Australian Labor Party wanting to break the people smugglers' business model. It's important to remember that the business model that the people smugglers have was designed by the Australian Labor Party. It was the ALP who got rid of offshore processing, who got rid of TPVs, and who softened their rhetoric.
You've both had a good crack at that. Let's take a break. We'll be right back on AM Agenda. Stay with us.